Hello everyone! Tonight we explore the story of a person, Marcus Ulpius Traianus, remembered as Trajan, the warrior emperor who expanded Rome to its greatest limits. From the dust of Italica to the thunder of distant battlefields, his journey was forged in conquest, politics, and ambition. Yet, behind the triumphs lay secrets, rivalries, and choices that would shape the fate of millions. Was his reign truly Rome's golden age, or did the seeds of decline take root under his rule? Tonight, we uncover the truth. Marcus Ulpius Traianus was born at Italica, in Hispania. Baetica, on the 18th of September AD 53, a veteran colony near the Baetis River, not far from Hispalis. Founded for Scipio's soldiers after the wars with Carthage, Italica mixed Latin law with Iberian earth. Olive terraces climbed its hills, brick kilns smoked beyond its walls, and legionary retirees argued in the forum about pay and honor. Trajan's father, also Marcus Ulpius Traianus, rose from provincial stock to the Senate, winning commands in the east. His mother, Marcia, came from a respectable Roman family. Between Umbrian ancestry and Spanish soil, the boy's Roman identity took root, loyal to law, hardened by frontier air. The colony's grid of streets taught measure and order. Its veterans taught him that promises matter most when rations run thin. From birth, he belonged to a world that measured distance by milestones and duty by the weight of the oath. His household blended austerity with ambition. The elder Traianus drilled discipline at home, valuing duty above display. He prized clear accounts, sharp tools, and plain speech. Marcia kept rites and letters alive, lighting the hearth to the lares each morning and reading moral exemplar at dusk. Travelers passed through bearing rumors of Syria, Judea, and the Danube. The boy listened, storing names, distances, and hazards, like a quartermaster noting grain and nails. Before he won the toga virilis, he learned to greet officers properly, to stand at ease without slouching, and to keep silent when grown men spoke of war and law. Humility was required, not feigned. Sandals were mended, tunics patched, wax tablets reused until the stylus cut grooves. Praise, when it came, was sparing and specific. A correctly tied pack, a short, true sentence, a clean roll call. Such economy of words and things became his first discipline. Italica's rhythms hardened him more than spectacles could. There were no marble prodigies to dazzle a child, only kilns, mule trains, and soldiers on leave folding pay into woolen purses. He learned to ride and to swim the Baetis against spring floods. He learned to endure summer heat and winds off the Sierras. Local magistrates taught the grammar of power. Decrees posted on wooden boards, taxes counted, justice dispensed with tablets and witnesses. In that modest forum, he saw that empire is a practice, not a dream, and that authority rests on steady hands and exact accounts, rather than pageantry. He watched veterans petition for land, traders argue over weights, and surveyors pace out roads with gnomon and cord. The lesson settled quietly. Greatness grows where small obligations are met on time, and where oaths travel further than banners. Formal schooling gave him instruments for command. A grammaticus drilled declensions and verse, then a rhetor shaped argument and cadence. Virgil for measure, Sallust for severity, Cicero for structure. The pedagogus kept him punctual and spare, forbidding idle chatter and gilded phrases. He practiced copia not to ornament speeches, but to weigh choices, to say enough and no more. When he hung up the bulla and exchanged the toga praetexta for the toga virilis, ceremony sealed instruction. He stepped from boyhood into civic duty, aware that speech, like iron, must be tempered by use and answer to consequence. Letters and law were yoked in his mind. A judgment poorly phrased becomes poorly obeyed. A promise made too broadly becomes impossible to keep. The future general began as a careful student of words. He learned to count time by campaigns and calendars alike, and to distrust applause that arrived too easily. His father's commands drew the family eastward. In Syrian camps, he learned the map by dust and stars, watching cohorts muster at dawn and scribes record rations by lamplight. Standards snapped in desert winds. Centurions called the count. Engineers sighted ditches and set stakes true. Logistics impressed him as much as glory. Grain, nails, timber, coin, the quiet arithmetic that keeps an army moving. He saw how a tardy wagon ripples into defeat and how a well-timed ferry becomes a victory. Power, he grasped, is a chain of solved problems, and the strongest link is the quiet one that holds. Along caravan roads, he heard Nabatean traders bargain, auxiliaries swap dialects, and scouts read hoofprints like ledgers. The world's size shrank into marches and measures he could master. What seemed chaos in the marketplace became order on the march. Both answered to counting. Occasional returns to Rome placed polish over discipline. On the Aventine, he watched processions for Vespasian and Titus, and later heard murmurs about Domitian's stern virtues and faults. In porticos, he traced bronze maps and learned frontiers by stone, from ocean to Euphrates. Yet Italica's plainness stayed his compass. If Rome dazzled, he blinked, not bowed. Splendor could flatter the eye, he concluded, but the test of rule lay elsewhere, in mud, pay, and morale. A city of marble became for him a workshop of laws, roads, and water, useful only when it served men who bled for it. He counted fountains as proofs of order and bridges as oaths kept. He judged a statesman by the aqueducts he maintained more than by statues he raised. Such measures would later guide his hand. Even in youth, he preferred function over flourish and memory over display. Service followed apprenticeship. As military tribune, he learned to read terrain, gauge water, and time a march, so men arrived ready to fight. He kept kit light, and orders simple, earning trust from rankers who measure officers by fairness more than pedigree. From Syria to the Rhine, he studied enemies as carefully as friends, noting that haste feeds disaster, and that the straight road sometimes needs a patient curve. He punished theft swiftly, praised courage publicly, and shared hardships without theater. Authority grew from example, confidence from results. He learned to write brief reports that could travel fast, and to keep contingencies folded like spare tunics in a pack. If a bridge failed, he could ford. If a ford failed, he could wait. Men followed him because he counted their steps before he counted their praises. He made few promises and kept all of them. The Flavian era framed his sense of power. From Vespasian, he absorbed thrift and the virtue of paying soldiers on time. From Titus, grace and the cure of mercy. From Domitian, the uses and risks of rigor. He saw that rulers succeed when they reward competence and fail when fear replaces counsel. When standards rose in the army, he welcomed the merit beneath the severity. He honored forms yet never mistook ceremony for substance. In barracks and courts alike, he weighed outcomes over applause and learned to separate what was necessary from what was merely loud. Such lessons, gathered without flourish, would steady him later when honors arrived in bundles and temptations multiplied. He resolved to keep the ledger close and the laurel at arm's length. Reputation, he discovered, is a shadow that follows work. Chase the shadow and you lose the road. Patronage threaded through his rise. The Ulpii's Umbrian ties opened doors in the Senate. Provincial success opened others in the camps. He learned how favors could be granted without civility and repaid without waste. Marriage to Pompeia Plotina, dignified and philosophical, added moral ballast to ambition. She prized plain speech and public honesty, and he prized the steadiness she embodied. Friends, such as Lucius Licinius Sura, sharpened his judgment, proving that loyal counsel sometimes contradicts desire, and that good advice must risk displeasure to keep its worth. From such company, he drew a habit of testing plans twice, once for glory, once for use. The second test usually ruled. Patronage became for him a network of obligations aimed at public ends, not a theater of private display. He preferred durable alliances to dazzling introductions and kept them by work, not flattery. By the early 90s, his competence ripened into high office. Under Domitian, he held the praetorship and, in AD 91, the consulship, a proof that merit could rise from provincial soil without losing its grit. Yet the arc began in Italica's dust. A boy between olive trees and drill yards, learning patience, proportion, and the price of promises. He carried Hispania's sun and Rome's law together, a fusion of frontier endurance and metropolitan measure. The apprentice now stood where summons find the ready. Beyond the horizon, an aging prince would soon need an heir. The Rhine had already tested his steadiness during the revolt of Antonius Saturninus. Though others crushed the rising, his swift march and firm discipline marked him as reliable under pressure. Such proofs mattered in a system that watched quietly before it trusted. Experience, layered year by year, became his credential. As a young officer, Trajan quickly proved himself in the provinces. His discipline, fairness, and ability to share hardships with the rank and file earned him loyalty from soldiers who valued deeds over words. Service on the Rhine honed his strategic sense, while postings in the east taught him diplomacy with allied kings. He mastered both the sword and the scroll, understanding that victory required as much negotiation as it did courage. Each campaign expanded his influence, and Rome began to notice the Spanish-born commander whose reputation spread faster than official reports. On the Rhine frontier, Trajan faced harsh winters and restless tribes. In the revolt of Antonius Saturninus, AD 89, he led his troops with speed and precision, ensuring the uprising was crushed before it could spread. Though others claimed the decisive blow, his rapid march earned Domitian's respect and the loyalty of frontier legions. He became known as a commander who valued readiness over rhetoric and whose judgment in crisis kept casualties low. For the soldiers stationed far from Rome's marble streets, Trajan's reliability mattered more than the politics of the capital. Following his frontier successes, Trajan was appointed to command the Legio VII Gemina in Hispania. There, he combined military oversight with civic improvements, repairing roads and ensuring fair tax collection. His governance balanced firmness with accessibility, a quality rare among Roman officials. By visiting markets and listening to local disputes, he secured loyalty from provincial elites and commoners alike. This blend of soldiers' grit and magistrates' fairness made him stand out, bridging the divide between Rome's distant power and the needs of its outlying provinces. Domitian recognized Trajan's value, granting him the rank of praetor and then higher commands. Yet the emperor's volatile temper kept many office, cautious. Trajan maintained a careful balance, never appearing ambitious, yet always delivering results. His habit of sharing victories with his men, rather than hoarding credit, contrasted with the suspicion that clouded Domitian's court. In a political climate where missteps could be fatal, Trajan's steady, unshowy competence became his greatest armor. He moved forward quietly, trusting that achievement would speak louder than flattery. In AD 91, Trajan reached the consulship, one of Rome's highest honors. For a provincial-born man, this was no small feat, signaling acceptance by the empire's inner circle. He used the role not to pursue grandeur, but to reinforce connections with the Senate and maintain goodwill among military peers. His speeches were short, his proposals practical, and his demeanor respectful yet firm. The consulship gave him visibility in the capital while keeping him close to his military roots. It was a calculated step, not a final destination. After the consulship, Trajan returned to military command, preferring the frontier to the intrigues of Rome. Posted again to Germania, he focused on strengthening defenses along the Rhine and Danube. He reorganized supply lines, built forts, and improved communication routes between outposts. His approach was preventative rather than reactive. He aimed to remove the enemy's opportunity before they could exploit a weakness. This methodical style won praise from fellow commanders, who saw in Trajan a leader more interested in stability than in risky displays of valor. When Domitian was assassinated in AD 96, the Senate chose the elderly Nerva as emperor. The new ruler faced unrest among the Praetorian Guard and doubts from the legions. To secure military loyalty, Nerva needed a respected commander. Trajan was the obvious choice. Summoned from the frontier, he accepted with measured humility. His appointment as governor of Germania Superior placed him in a position to command some of Rome's most experienced legions. The choice reassured soldiers that their interests had not been forgotten in the sudden change of leadership. In Germania, Trajan's rapport with the legions deepened. He visited camps personally, inspecting conditions and addressing grievances without intermediaries. Promotions were awarded for merit, not politics, a policy that boosted morale. When disciplinary measures were necessary, they were delivered firmly but fairly, reinforcing respect for his authority. This style not only kept the frontier secure, but also projected an image of stability back to Rome. For Nerva, Trajan was becoming more than a general. He was a bridge between the emperor and the army. Nerva's position remained fragile. Tensions with the Praetorian Guard threatened open conflict. In AD 97, he adopted Trajan as his son and heir, a move designed to ensure military loyalty and a smooth succession. The announcement was met with celebration among the legions, who saw in Trajan a commander who had shared their hardships. The adoption transformed him from a provincial-born officer into the next emperor of Rome. It was the culmination of decades of steady advancement, each step earned through discipline, competence, and measured ambition. By the time Nerva named him Caesar, Trajan embodied the ideal soldier-statesman. He had faced rebellion, commanded legions, governed provinces, and navigated the dangerous waters of imperial politics without scandal. His ascent was neither sudden nor accidental. It was the result of consistent service, earned loyalty, and a refusal to compromise his standards. The man who began in the quiet streets of Italica now stood poised to lead the greatest empire in the world, with the army's full confidence at his back and the Senate's approval ahead. When Nerva died in January AD 98, Trajan was in Germania, securing the empire's northern frontier. News of his succession reached him among the camps, and instead of rushing to Rome, he chose to finish his inspections, a deliberate act signaling that the army's stability came first. This patience reassured the legions and the provinces, showing that the new emperor valued order over ceremony. By the time he began his journey south, messages of loyalty poured in from governors and commanders. His reign began with discipline, not haste. Trajan's first steps as emperor emphasized respect for the Senate. Upon entering Rome, he greeted senators personally, restored honors stripped during Domitian's purges, and promised an administration free from fear. This earned him praise from a political class weary of suspicion. By keeping his language direct and avoiding excessive flattery, he built trust. His modest entrance, walking alongside officials rather than riding in triumph, sent a clear message. Rome's leader was a servant of the state, not a distant autocrat. It was a sharp break from the shadow of tyranny. Early in his rule, Trajan inspected Rome's finances. He cut wasteful spending, redirected resources to infrastructure, and made sure provincial governors were accountable for tax revenues. Corruption, a chronic problem, faced real consequences under his watch. He maintained fair relations with equestrians who managed imperial finances, valuing efficiency over favoritism. This financial discipline allowed him to fund public works without heavy new taxes, strengthening both the city and his popularity. Citizens saw tangible improvements while the treasury remained secure, a rare balance in imperial governance. The people of Rome quickly warmed to their new ruler. Trajan attended public games, mingled freely in the forum, and listened to petitions without layers of bureaucracy. His willingness to engage directly with ordinary citizens earned him the affectionate title Optimus Princeps early in his reign. He reduced spectacles funded by excessive taxes, favoring celebrations paid from his personal wealth. This approach won admiration not only from the urban poor, but also from landowners relieved by reduced fiscal pressure. His accessibility became one of his defining traits as emperor. Trajan began ambitious building projects that would define his legacy. He ordered new roads, aqueduct repairs, and the expansion of harbors to improve trade. In Rome itself, he planned monuments that would later symbolize imperial power and civic pride. These works were not merely decorative, they strengthened the empire's infrastructure, facilitating troop movement and economic growth. His engineers worked closely with military surveyors, ensuring projects met practical needs. The combination of beauty and utility reflected Trajan's belief that Rome's greatness depended on both glory and function. While focused on domestic stability, Trajan never neglected the empire's borders. He maintained strong garrisons in Germania and along the Danube, personally reviewing troop readiness. His policy was to combine defense with calculated preparation for future expansion. By keeping the legions well supplied and disciplined, he deterred potential aggressors without costly campaigns. This readiness served as both a warning to hostile tribes and a reassurance to allies. His soldiers respected his presence on the frontier, seeing in him an emperor who understood their daily hardships. Trajan also addressed provincial concerns. He sent inspectors to ensure governors ruled justly, encouraged local councils to manage affairs efficiently, and invested in provincial infrastructure. By treating distant provinces as integral parts of the empire rather than exploited territories, he fostered loyalty. Reports from governors emphasized reduced unrest and improved tax collection without force. This policy reflected his understanding that Rome's strength came from the cooperation of its diverse peoples. In distant cities, his name began to carry the weight of a fair and attentive ruler. His relationship with the Senate continued to strengthen. Trajan invited open debate, accepted constructive criticism, and even modified policies based on senatorial advice. This atmosphere of cooperation contrasted sharply with Domitian's era of fear. Senators who had once kept silent now spoke freely, confident that disagreement would not lead to exile or death. By sharing authority in matters of law and finance, Trajan reinforced the image of a principled leader. This mutual respect between princeps and senate would remain a hallmark of his governance. Trajan's early reign also saw reforms in the legal system. He improved the appointment process for provincial judges, ensuring that competence outweighed political connections. Appeals to the emperor were handled with speed, preventing delays that could ruin lives or businesses. His commitment to justice extended to the protection of property rights and the fair treatment of freedmen. These changes not only reduced corruption, but also increased public trust in imperial authority. For many citizens, the law now felt like a shield rather than a weapon. By the close of his first years as emperor, Trajan had secured the army's loyalty, restored the Senate's dignity, and won the affection of the people. His balance of military readiness, civic improvement, and personal humility set a new standard for leadership. Yet beyond the calm of early rule, challenges loomed, most notably in Dacia, where King Decebalus tested Rome's resolve. The coming conflict would demand all the skills Trajan had honed over decades and would define the next great chapter of his reign. By AD 101, the Dacians under King Decebalus had become a persistent threat along the Danube frontier. Although a previous treaty required them to remain a client state, they rebuilt fortresses, recruited allies, and fortified their mountain strongholds in the Orashtia range. Rome could not ignore a neighbor capable of raiding its provinces and undermining imperial authority. Trajan, valuing decisive action over prolonged tension, began assembling legions from Moesia, Pannonia, and the Rhine, determined to crush the Dacian challenge before it could grow into a greater danger. Trajan personally led the campaign, traveling north with the precision of a seasoned commander. The Danube was the first obstacle, and he ordered the construction of massive pontoon bridges to move troops and supplies efficiently. His engineers, working under the watch of the emperor himself, ensured that every wagon, siege engine, and ration crossed in perfect order. This logistical mastery allowed Rome's forces to enter Dacian territory fully prepared. For the soldiers, seeing their emperor share the march strengthened morale and reminded them of his military roots. The early battles of the campaign tested both sides. At Tapae, the Romans faced fierce resistance in the narrow mountain passes, where Dacian warriors used the terrain to their advantage. Trajan's disciplined formations and coordinated use of auxiliary troops eventually pushed them back, but not without significant Roman casualties. The engagement proved that Dacia was no minor opponent. Their warriors were skilled, motivated, and resourceful. Rather than rush recklessly forward, Trajan paused to secure supply lines, fortify positions, and prepare for the next phase of the war. Winter forced a temporary halt in large-scale operations, but Trajan used the time wisely. He strengthened Roman outposts along the Danube and reorganized Team Trajan. He army for renewed offensive action in the spring. Diplomacy was also employed. Some tribes allied with Rome, eager to avoid Dacian dominance. This combination of military readiness and political maneuvering allowed Trajan to isolate Decebalus, cutting off potential reinforcements. The emperor's ability to wage war on both the battlefield and the negotiation table gave Rome a crucial strategic advantage. When campaigning resumed in AD 102, Trajan launched a coordinated assault deeper into Dacian territory. Roman legions, supported by cavalry and siege engineers, advanced methodically toward the capital, Sarmizegetusa. The Dacians, unable to match Roman siege technology, resorted to guerrilla tactics and scorched earth measures. Despite these efforts, Trajan's disciplined forces continued to advance, dismantling fortresses and capturing key supply depots. Each victory weakened Dacian morale, while the steady Roman advance made it clear that resistance could only delay, not prevent, their defeat. One of the most decisive confrontations occurred near the Dacian capital. Trajan's legions, supported by archers and artillery, overcame fortified positions that had previously been thought impregnable. The engineering corps dismantled enemy defenses with rams and towers, while infantry pressed forward under covering fire. Dacian counterattacks were fierce, but ultimately broken by Roman discipline. The fall of these strongholds signaled to surrounding tribes that Decebalus could not protect them, leading many to surrender or switch allegiance. The Dacian king's circle of support was shrinking rapidly. Facing defeat, Decebalus sought peace, offering to renew the earlier treaty and return Roman deserters and captured engineers. Trajan agreed, but imposed far harsher terms. Dacia was to dismantle its fortifications, surrender all Roman captives, and give up its war machines. Rome would maintain a permanent military presence along the border to enforce compliance. These conditions effectively reduced Dacia to a dependent state, curbing its ability to threaten Roman provinces. The agreement allowed Trajan to consolidate gains without the heavy losses of a prolonged siege. The Peace of AD 102 was celebrated in Rome as a triumph of both arms and leadership. Trajan returned briefly to the capital, where he refused an extravagant personal triumph, preferring to honor the soldiers who had fought alongside him. Funds from the campaign were directed toward public works, including roads, bridges, and improvements in provincial infrastructure. This reinforced his image as a ruler who placed the empire's stability above personal glory. Yet in the provinces, many suspected the peace would be temporary, as Decebalus was unlikely to accept lasting subjugation. Indeed, even as Rome celebrated, reports emerged that Decebalus was violating the treaty. He rebuilt fortifications in secret, recruited new allies, and sought foreign assistance, possibly from Parthia. Trajan's intelligence network kept him informed of these developments, but rather than rush into another war, he continued strengthening Rome's hold over the Danube frontier. The emperor knew that patience would yield a decisive victory when the time came. In the meantime, he focused on integrating newly secured territories into the imperial system. The First Dacian War ended with Rome's prestige enhanced and its northern borders more secure, but Trajan saw the conflict as unfinished. The treaty bought time, not peace, and he began preparing for the inevitable second campaign. His first Dacian victory demonstrated not only his skill as a general, but also his strategic patience. When the final reckoning came, he intended to ensure that Dacia would never again challenge Roman supremacy. For now, the empire could enjoy a moment of triumph, knowing its leader was far from complacent. By AD 105, the fragile peace with Dacia had collapsed. Reports from the frontier confirmed what Trajan had long suspected. Decebalus had rebuilt fortresses, rearmed his troops, and sought alliances to counter Rome's influence. Envoys sent to demand compliance were dismissed or deceived. For Trajan, the treaty's violation was not only an insult, but a strategic threat to Rome's northern provinces. Determined to end the Dacian problem once and for all, he ordered a massive mobilization, drawing legions from across the empire for a final, decisive campaign. This time, Trajan planned for total victory. He assembled over 10 legions, supported by auxiliary cohorts, cavalry, and an unparalleled engineering corps. His forces gathered along the Danube, where work began on one of Rome's most ambitious projects, the bridge at Drobeta, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus. Spanning the mighty river with stone piers and wooden arches, it allowed rapid, secure movement of troops and supplies. The bridge itself became a symbol of Roman determination, showing that no natural barrier could shield Dacia from imperial reach. The campaign began with coordinated advances into Dacian territory from multiple directions, overwhelming the enemy's ability to respond. Roman forces captured key mountain passes, cutting off supply lines and isolating fortified towns. Trajan moved methodically, ensuring each victory was secured before pressing forward. Siege engines battered enemy walls, while archers and slingers harassed defenders. The emperor's presence on the front lines kept morale high. Soldiers knew they fought not just for Rome's honor, but for an emperor who shared their dangers and trusted their discipline. Dacian resistance was fierce, with Decebalus employing ambushes and guerrilla tactics in the rugged terrain. Yet Roman discipline and superior engineering gradually broke through the Leptu. Giants built fortified camps at every stage, ensuring secure bases for further operations. When the Dacians tried to disrupt Roman supply routes, cavalry patrols and fortified depots kept provisions flowing. This relentless, organized pressure steadily reduced Dacian territory. The closer Rome advanced towards Sarmizegetusa, the more the balance tipped toward inevitable conquest, despite the defenders' desperate courage. The decisive siege of Sarmizegetusa began in AD 106. Roman forces encircled the mountain capital, cutting off water supplies by destroying aqueducts and blocking streams. Siege towers, rams, and artillery pounded the defenses day and night. Inside the city, famine and disease spread rapidly. Decebalus, refusing to surrender, attempted to break out and rally forces elsewhere, but his plan failed. The city fell to the legions, who dismantled its walls and seized vast stores of treasure and weaponry. Dacia's independence was effectively destroyed. Decebalus fled into the mountains with a small retinue, pursued by Roman cavalry. Rather than face capture and humiliation in a Roman triumph, he took his own life. His death ended organized resistance and allowed Trajan to claim total victory. Roman forces scoured the countryside, accepting the surrender of remaining strongholds and securing valuable resources. With the enemy leader gone, the task shifted from conquest to consolidation. Dacia's gold mines and fertile lands were now firmly in Roman hands, ready to be integrated into the empire. Trajan transformed Dacia into a Roman province, settling veterans and colonists to secure the territory. New roads, forts, and administrative centers linked the region to the broader imperial network. Latin became the language of governance, while Roman law replaced local customs. The province served both as a buffer against northern tribes and a source of wealth through mining and agriculture. By embedding Roman infrastructure and culture, Trajan aimed to make Dacia a lasting part of the empire, not just a conquered land under military occupation. The triumph celebrated in Rome was one of the most spectacular in imperial history. Trajan paraded prisoners, treasures, and exotic animals through the streets, culminating in his own appearance as the victorious general. Yet he did not indulge in excessive personal glorification. He credited the legions for their discipline and bravery. The spoils of war funded monumental projects, including the Forum of Trajan and the famous column that depicted the Dacian campaigns in intricate relief, ensuring that Rome's citizens could see and remember their emperor's achievements. The Dacian campaigns marked the height of Trajan's military career and expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. Strategically, the conquest secured Rome's northern frontier and gave it access to vital resources. Politically, it enhanced Trajan's standing as both a warrior and a capable administrator. His combination of decisive action, careful planning, and infrastructure building set a standard for imperial warfare. The Second Dacian War was not merely a conquest, it was a deliberate reshaping of the empire's geography and economy for long-term stability. By the end of AD 106, Trajan had secured a legacy as Rome's greatest conqueror since Augustus. The Dacian Wars demonstrated his ability to combine military might with administrative foresight, at ensuring that new territories were not only taken but held. Yet while the empire basked in prosperity, challenges loomed on distant frontiers. In the east, tensions with Parthia simmered, and in the west, the vast new borders required vigilant defense. For now, Rome celebrated, but its emperor was already planning his next great campaign. With Dacia subdued, Trajan turned conquest into cohesion. He audited frontier garrisons, redeployed veterans, and routed the flood of war spoils into public works rather than court luxury. The message was precise. Victories must feed order. Across Italy and the provinces, surveyors marked roads, engineers mapped rivers, and treasurers balanced ledgers swollen by new mines. The emperor's presence remained tactile, boots in mud, eyes on accounts, so praise never drifted far from proof. Stability, not spectacle, defined the moment. Prosperity was a policy, not a parade. He kept frontier maps rolled beside balance sheets, a pairing that linked roads to revenues. Rome itself became a workshop of stone. Trajan commissioned a new forum, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus, a grand axis with the Basilica Ulpia, twin libraries, and markets terraced into the Quirinal's carved flank. The complex answered traffic as much as ore, linking courts, commerce, and archives under a measured geometry of light. Where earlier emperors chased astonishment, Trajan pursued usefulness that dazzled anyway. Every pier and arch declared that law and logistics, not flattery, underpin empire. Beauty served purpose, marble carried work. The markets of Trajan stacked shops on arcades, giving guilds light and airflow while taxing fairly by frontage. Scholars climbed library stairways to consult Greek and Latin shelves. The forum taught Rome to work together by simply working well. Prosperity, he judged, must touch households. Trajan expanded Nerva's Alimenta, a credit scheme that loaned imperial funds to Italian landowners. Interest paid for stipends to poor children. Curators tracked bonds and harvests. Local decurions verified names. The program stabilized farms, eased urban hunger, and tied loyalty to measurable relief, not rhetoric. In towns long bruised by debt, the program softened usury's bite. In lean vintages, children still ate. Inscriptions thanked the princeps not for gifts but for mechanisms, tables of rates, names of curators, deadlines that made mercy routine. Critics muttered about costs. Ledgers answered with repayments that fed the fund anew. What began as relief matured into policy, a steady bridge between imperial capital and rural roofs, and proof that a spreadsheet can be kinder than a speech. Water and movement framed his civic vision. The Aqua Traiana, opened in 109, drew cold volcanic springs to the Janiculum, feeding baths, mills, and fountains. At the sea, the hexagonal basin at Portus improved grain landings and winter shelter, taming storms that once starved the city. Inland, milestones ticked outward as bridges and causeways stitched provinces tighter. By joining aqueduct to harbor and road to market, the emperor turned infrastructure into policy, a supply chain as ideology, visible from quay to hilltop. Inland mills on the Janiculum turned water into flour, easing the midnight labor of bakeries that fed whole districts by dawn. When droughts nipped at harvests, reserves moved with fewer losses. The difference between scarcity and riot measured in cured planks and sound pilings. Infrastructure became the quiet theater where hunger was defeated before it appeared. Administration grew sharper, not harsher. Governors were audited by results, repaired roads, settled cases, honest accounts, rather than by theatrical decrees. Trajan's rescripts, terse and practical, clarified property disputes and municipal law without choking towns in edict dust. He valued letters that solved problems over orations that won applause. Corrupt officials felt the cut. Competent ones found promotion safe. Provincial petitions traveled faster because the palace rewarded speed, not ceremony. He treated precedent as a tool, not a trap, revising forms that bred delay. Municipal councils regained clear duties. Temples kept endowments under eyes that counted, not coveted. He asked for summaries that fit on a page and decisions that fit the facts, a discipline multiplying across offices like gears catching. The empire began to sound like a well-tuned workshop. In Dacia, consolidation followed conquest. Veterans settled at Ulpia Traiana Sarmaizegatusa. Forts guarded passes while surveyors plotted mining districts. Gold and silver from the Apuseni funded salaries and building, but soldiers also kept the peace on new roads reaching across Transylvania. Latin took hold in ledgers and courts. Local elites entered councils, trading autonomy for Roman law and predictable taxes. The province became both shield and treasury, its mountains secured not only by garrisons but by contracts, weights, and stamped ingots. Contracts specified ore weights, timber quotas, and wagon rotations. Stamps on ingots carried dates with imperial names, folding honesty into metal. Priests kept local rights, but civic boards wrote minutes in Latin, so decisions traveled. Children learned two calendars, old feasts and Roman courts, finding room for both beneath new tiles. Public honor shadowed policy. Coins styled the emperor Germanicus and Dacicus. Senators and plebs saluted him as Optimus Prince, P.S., a praise that would harden into title in the early 110s. Yet his choreography stayed disciplined. Laurels worn briefly, credits shared widely. Triumphal art recorded campaigns, but the narrative favored order over rage. Bridges, marches, councils, and the measured tilt of scales. Glory, in Trajan's telling, was a ledger balanced and a road completed on time. On coin reverses, Abundantia and Pax held cornucopia and olives beside bridges and harbors. Policy translated into symbols legible to farmers and sailors. Optimus meant something countable. Fewer shortages, safer roads, judges who listened, and a city that slept without fear of fire. Trade thickened through the arteries he built. The hexagon at Portus shortened queues on the Tiber. Warehouses stacked grain and textiles, and shipwrights refit hulls between seasons. In inland towns, markets widened under tiled roofs. On frontiers, new depots steadied prices that war had once jerked wild. The Annona, Rome's grain lifeline, ran calmer. Its risks spread between sea, river, and road. Caravans from Africa. Proconsularis met wine casks out of Gaul. Syrian glass glittered beside Spanish oil at stalls that saw more scales certified and fewer arguments settled by fists. Guild oaths pledged honest measure. Inspectors arrived unannounced and left with fines recorded, not bribes pocketed. By smoothing frictions, Trajan freed energy for craft and risk. Prosperity gathered in margins, the cumulative profit of small repairs done everywhere. Relations with the Senate remained frank and unafraid. Trajan invited criticism that could improve a plan, trimmed projects that outgrew their use, and kept accounts open to inspection. Plotinus' quiet virtue set a tone for court life, measured, courteous, and free of petty terror. So governors wrote home in sentences shaped by duty rather than dread. Honors flowed, but they followed performance, not proximity. The city felt governed, not managed. The empire felt steered, not shoved. Authority breathed easier when watched. He favored commissions staffed by competence over factions staffed by noise. When budgets swelled, he paired them to scope. When storms toppled roofs, he opened reserves without drama. Senators, safe in disagreement, proposed improvements rather than panegyrics. The government's tone reached even far provinces, firm, intelligible, resistant to panic. At the height of peace, he studied the East. Armenia's throne tangled Rome with Parthia, and client kings wobbled along the Euphrates. Trajan stocked depots in Syria, checked roads across Cappadocia, and weighed the cost of glory against the price of delay. He did not hurry. He prepared. The same habits that built aqueducts shaped campaign plans, measure spans, test loads, leave reserves. When the summons came, the empire would march on groundwork already laid, its confidence poured in concrete and counted in rations. Scouts tested routes in all seasons. Accountants modeled costs against harvest cycles so wars would not eat seed corn. Embassies arrived with careful flattery. He measured promises against bridges and wagons he could count. Strategy, as ever, began with inventory and ended with timing. With Dacia secure and Rome at ease, Trajan's gaze drifted eastward, where Armenia sat like a hinge between Rome and Parthia. The death of a client king stirred disputes, and Parthia's choice of a new ruler without Rome's consent bristled imperial pride. For Trajan, this was more than protocol. It was a challenge to the balance of power he had spent years stabilizing. He saw opportunity wrapped in risk, a chance to reaffirm Rome's reach, to knit the eastern provinces tighter, and to carry his legacy beyond the Danube's victories into lands where Alexander's shadow still stretched across maps. Preparation became policy. Legions along the Syrian frontier drilled under sharpened discipline. Engineers surveyed mountain passes and storehouses filled with grain, salted meat, and siege timber. Roads from Antioch to the Euphrates were repaired, so an army could move as swiftly as a message. Merchants, sensing both danger and profit, stockpiled goods for soldiers who would pay in steady denarii. The campaign's outline grew quietly, shaped not in Rome's Senate, but in the measured logistics of men, mules, and milestones. Trajan's wars were built like his forums, planned stone by stone, so the foundation was laid before the facade appeared. Diplomacy played its part. Envoys from client states along the Euphrates came bearing tribute and questions. Trajan listened with the patience of one who knows decisions need not be rushed to be decisive. Armenia's new king, installed without Roman consent, became the symbolic hinge of negotiation. Offers of compromise drifted through embassies, but the emperor measured each against Rome's standing and the lessons of history. A soft response might invite further encroachment. A firm hand, if backed by readiness, could settle the matter without blood. Trajan's calm masked a precision that weighed every word like coin. In Rome, whispers about the cost of Eastern wars threaded through the forum. Senators recalled Crassus's disaster at Carrhae, the long struggles of Mark Antony, and the drain of distant campaigns. Trajan countered with evidence. The treasury swelled from Dacian gold, the roads were ready, and the legions were at their prime. To him, delay was a greater expense than movement. An unresolved insult at the border would erode Rome's credibility. War, if it came, would not be a gamble. It would be an investment. The returns measured in secure frontiers and the prestige that kept allies loyal without constant bribes. Yet ambition reached beyond security. The emperor studied old maps of Alexander's march, tracing the arcs of conquest from Asia Minor to the Persian Gulf. Rome had long managed its eastern frontier through buffers and treaties, but Trajan imagined more. Direct control over Armenia, Mesopotamia, and perhaps the fabled riches of the East. Such dreams were not spoken as promises, but his closest advisors could read them in the precision of his orders. This was not restlessness. It was a calculation that the empire's golden age should be marked not just by walls held, but by horizons widened. Logistics deepened. Canal works in the Orontes Valley promised swifter transport for supplies. New barges were commissioned for the Euphrates. Smithies in Antioch and Berytus rang with the shaping of weapons, while quarrymen cut stone for temporary fortresses that could be razed in weeks. Contracts fixed grain prices for the campaign's duration. curbing speculation that might starve the civilians as soldiers advanced. Even the coinage shifted subtly, its imagery leaning toward themes of victory and providence, a silent promise to the Roman people that the eastward venture was inevitable and that its rewards would return home in tangible wealth. Plotina and trusted advisors urged measured pace, knowing that overextension had undone great powers before. Trajan listened, yet the pull of the east was strong. Reports from scouts detailed fertile valleys, bustling caravan cities, and the strategic choke points that could turn control into fortune. Each dispatch fed a vision of Rome as master of two seas, the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, its merchants trading without rival from Britannia to India. To those who feared the strain, Trajan answered not with dismissal, but with the quiet confidence of one who had prepared every hinge before opening the gate. By the winter before the campaign, all was in readiness. The legions stood in Syria like drawn bows. The road networks thrummed with movement. The Senate had offered formal support, if not without its skeptics. The emperor himself left Rome, entrusting the city to steady hands, and took command at Antioch. From there, he could see the shape of the challenge and the prize beyond it. The Parthian frontier awaited, not as an abstract line on a map, but as a landscape of rivers, walls, and cities that would soon feel the weight of Rome's most disciplined machine. Spring arrived with steel in its breath. Trajan's legions crossed into Armenia, their standards gleaming under a cold sun. The Parthian installed king fled before the disciplined tide, leaving the throne empty for Rome's chosen candidate. The swift victory was no accident. Trajan's months of preparation had made resistance futile. Towns along the march surrendered without siege, their gates thrown open to the promise of Roman order. Each step eastward carried both the weight of history and the thrill of expansion. To soldiers who had tasted Dacian triumph, this was the next proving ground for their emperor's vision. Armenia fell quietly into Rome's grasp, but Mesopotamia promised sterner work. The Euphrates loomed, wide and swift, its crossings guarded by Parthian forts. Engineers set to work under constant watch, driving piles into the riverbed while archers shielded their labor. When the bridge was ready, the army moved with relentless pace. Infantry, cavalry, siege engines, supply wagons, an unbroken column stretching for miles. Parthian scouts harried the fringes, but never pressed a full fight. Trajan knew the real test lay ahead. The fertile plains beyond the river were both a prize and a trap, depending on how swiftly he could secure them. Edessa, a city of strategic value, opened its gates after measured negotiation. Its ruler, weighing the cost of defiance, chose loyalty over ruin. Trajan rewarded cooperation with favorable terms, ensuring local leaders became partners rather than prisoners. Grain from the surrounding countryside poured into Roman stores, feeding the advance and denying resources to Parthian forces. The emperor moved with the balance of soldier and statesman, understanding that conquest was as much about the willing submission of cities as the breaking of enemy lines. Each ally in Mesopotamia was a fortress without the need for stone walls. Resitas.
Stance stiffened near Nisibis, where Parthian forces chose to make a stand. The battle was fierce, fought under the oppressive heat of early summer. Roman discipline outmatched Parthian speed. The legions absorbed cavalry charges, then countered with heavy infantry pushing shield by shield. By dusk, the city's defenders retreated, leaving its gates to be claimed by Rome. Trajan walked the bloodied streets himself, ensuring discipline in victory. No uncontrolled plunder, no reckless cruelty. His conquest was designed to endure, and endurance demanded that Rome be feared for its strength, not hated for its excess. With Upper Mesopotamia under Roman control, Trajan pushed south toward the Twin Rivers heartlands. Each captured city added to Rome's supply lines, each road cleared brought him closer to the Persian Gulf. Yet he was no fool. Parthia's main strength lay farther east, and their king had yet to commit his full forces. Scouts reported caravans rerouting to avoid Roman patrols, merchants hiding their treasures in desert strongholds, The campaign was as much about economic strangulation as military might, and Trajan intended to tighten his grip until the Parthian monarch had no choice but to confront him. The capture of Dura Europos marked another jewel in Rome's chain. Situated on the Euphrates, its high walls and river access made it a natural stronghold. Trajan ordered the city fortified further, transforming it into a permanent Roman garrison. From here, patrols could sweep the riverbanks, intercepting both messengers and supplies bound for the Parthian heartland. The move sent a clear message. Rome was not here to raid and withdraw, but to stay. Citizens watched with mixed feelings, caught between the security of Rome's order and the looming reality that their lives now beat to a Roman drum. In every camp, morale remained high. The emperor's presence among the soldiers was no hollow gesture. He ate their rations, listened to their concerns, and commended acts of bravery. Stories from the Dacian wars were retold at firesides, binding old veterans to new recruits in shared pride. Yet Trajan also kept his officers sharp, reminding them that victories here would be meaningless if supply faltered or discipline slipped. The Parthians were elusive, masters of feigned retreat, and the heat of the plains could kill as surely as any spear. Preparation, he knew, was the only antidote to overconfidence. Autumn's onset brought storms to the Euphrates and whispers of a Parthian counterattack. Trajan welcomed the challenge. His columns shifted south, striking swiftly before the enemy could gather in full force. Cities fell in quick succession, their rulers choosing Rome's peace over Parthia's uncertain promises. The empire's eastern frontier had advanced farther than ever before, but for Trajan, this was only the middle act. Ahead lay the ancient city of Ctesiphon, seat of the Parthian kings. To take it would not only break the enemy's power, it would crown his reign with the most glittering triumph Rome had seen. Winter's chill could not cool the fire in Rome's advance. Trajan's legions moved along the Tigris with relentless precision, their scouts mapping every ford and fortification. Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, loomed ahead, a sprawling city of palaces and markets, its golden domes reflecting the low sun. The Parthian king had withdrawn beyond the mountains, leaving only a garrison to hold the seat of power. Yet the city's defenses were formidable, with high walls and seasoned archers. To the emperor, this was the culmination of his eastern dream, not just to win a battle, but to claim the enemy's very heart. Trajan ordered siege lines drawn tight around Ctesiphon. Towers of timber rose along the perimeter, each topped with artillery crews ready to rain stone and flame upon the defenders. Legionaries dug trenches to cut the city off from the river, choking its lifeline. Days turned into weeks as the siege engines wore down walls that had withstood centuries. Inside, hunger gnawed at the populace, while Roman camps remained well fed from secured supply lines. The emperor's presence along the front was constant, urging his men forward. Every strike of the battering ram felt like a drumbeat, calling the city's fate closer. The final assault came at dawn. Under a veil of morning mist, Roman ladders scraped against Ctesiphone's walls while rams pounded the main gate. Trumpets blared across the Tigris, drowning the defenders' shouted orders. Arrows fell in deadly arcs, but the legions pressed on, shields locking to form an unbreakable shell. The gate splintered and cohorts surged inside, their discipline holding even amid the chaos. Markets became battlegrounds, courtyards turned into kill zones. By midday, the garrison surrendered, and the imperial standard rose over the palace, a banner declaring that Rome now sat in the Parthian throne room. Ctesiphone's riches were staggering. Gold and silver ornaments, silks from the east, spices that perfumed the air. Yet Trajan forbade wholesale plunder, ordering catalogues of the treasures for Rome's coffers. This was not to be a sack, but a statement that the might of Rome could take and hold the wealthiest city in the east without descending into barbarity. The citizens, though subdued, were spared massacre. Local craftsmen and merchants were put under Roman protection, ensuring the city's economy could serve imperial needs. Victory here was not just conquest, it was the laying of a foundation for enduring control. Flush with triumph,
Trajan turned his gaze farther south. The Tigris became Rome's highway, carrying the legions toward the Persian Gulf. Fort after fort fell with little resistance, their commanders unwilling to defy an emperor who had taken Ctesiphon. The climate grew harsher, the air heavy with salt and heat, yet the soldiers marched with the pride of history makers. To reach the Gulf was to push Rome's frontier to its greatest extent, fulfilling dreams Julius Caesar had never lived to see. Every step forward felt like an inscription being carved into the eternal record of imperial glory. The journey's end came with the glitter of sunlight on open water. Standing on the shores of the Persian Gulf, Trajan looked out across the horizon, imagining trade routes that could bind Rome to the riches of India. Here, the empire had touched the edge of the known world. Altars were raised, sacrifices offered to Neptune and Jupiter for safe passage and enduring dominion. In letters to the Senate, Trajan spoke not of limits, but of beginnings, of a Rome that could command not only the Mediterranean, but every sea that carried the wealth of distant lands. Even at the empire's zenith, shadows gathered. Messages from the west spoke of unrest among newly conquered peoples, and murmurs of revolt stirred in the territories just subdued. The Parthian king, though driven into the mountains, had not been destroyed. Trajan knew that in war, the moment of greatest triumph was often the most dangerous. He ordered fortifications strengthened along the Tigris and Euphrates, determined to hold the gains he had carved. Yet the distance from Rome's core was immense, and supply lines stretched like taut strings, ready to snap under the weight of resistance. In Ctesiphon, Roman administration began its work. Governors, engineers, and traders replaced generals in the palace halls. Roads were repaired, markets reopened, and laws imposed to bind the city into Rome's system. Yet loyalty was fragile, dependent on the continued presence of Roman steel. Trajan understood the truth of empire. Conquest was swift, but governance demanded patience. Even as he planned future campaigns eastward, he kept one eye on the balance of power in the provinces he had taken. The fall of Ctesiphon had been spectacular, but holding it might prove the greater challenge of his reign. The return journey upriver carried both glory and unease. Barges heavy with spoils and hostages drifted past the cities that now bore Rome's eagle standards. Soldiers sang of victories, yet officers quietly tallied the costs. Men lost to battle and disease, treasuries drained by constant campaigning. Trajan, though outwardly resolute, felt the strain as well. The campaign had reached its pinnacle, and now the question was whether the empire could sustain its new expanse. His thoughts returned to the long histories of empires past, how quickly they could collapse when stretched too far from their center. Back in Antioch, the emperor was received with thunderous acclaim. Envoys from distant lands brought gifts, senators sent letters of praise, and poets began crafting verses to immortalize his deeds. Yet beneath the pageantry lay the knowledge that war in the east was far from over. The Parthians would regroup, and the desert had a way of erasing even the boldest lines on a map. Still, Trajan allowed himself one moment to savor the height of his power. In that winter of triumph, he stood as the master of more territory than any Roman before him. The triumph at the Gulf marked the height of Trajan's career, yet even emperors are not immune to time. The march back west was slowed by illness, an intermittent fever that clung to him like a shadow. Still, he refused to relinquish command, directing his armies from a litter carried between camps. The legions, seeing their leader's determination, pushed on with renewed loyalty. To Trajan, the work was unfinished. He intended to consolidate the east, perhaps even return for another strike into Parthia. But the weight of years and campaigns was beginning to exact its price. In Antioch, the emperor's health worsened. Physicians brought from across the empire prescribed rest and tonics, but the stubborn soldier emperor treated their advice as if it were another negotiation to be won. His mind wandered often to Rome, its streets, its senate, and the monuments he had built. Reports from the frontiers reached him daily, each decision still requiring his approval. Yet the sharpness of his command dulled at times, and courtiers began to whisper of succession. The empire had grown vast under his hand, but the question of who would guide it next loomed larger each day. Even in weakness, Trajan sought to leave a final mark. He confirmed the appointment of his adopted heir, Hadrian, though the choice was made quietly to avoid unrest among rival factions. Hadrian, a seasoned administrator and soldier, had long been close to the emperor, yet their relationship had cooled in recent years. Still, Trajan understood the necessity of securing stability. The formal announcement would come later, but in these private moments, decisions were made that would shape the empire's course long after the great conqueror's death. It was the last strategic move of a lifetime spent in command. In the summer of 117, Trajan embarked on the journey back to Rome. His entourage traveled along the coast, topping in cities where the emperor was hailed as a living legend. Crowds gathered to see the man who had extended Rome's boundaries farther than any before him. Yet behind the cheers lay the reality. His body was failing. The Mediterranean sun, once invigorating, now felt oppressive, and each mile seemed longer than the last. His companions began to understand that this voyage was not a return to rule, but a slow farewell to the empire he had built. At the city of Selinus in Cilicia, Trajan's condition deteriorated sharply. Fever racked his body, and even the simplest movements exhausted him. Local officials rushed to provide comfort, turning their governor's residence into a temporary imperial palace. Messengers carried word to Rome, though none knew if he would live to see the city again. Surrounded by his most trusted aides, Trajan continued to speak of future projects, roads to be built, provinces to be reorganized, refusing to accept that his time was nearly over. Yet each day, the once commanding voice grew softer, as though distance itself was claiming him. On August 8, 117 AD, the emperor who had conquered Dacia, humbled Parthia, and reshaped the empire's borders, drew his final breath. His death was met with mourning across the provinces, for Trajan had ruled with both strength and a sense of justice. Soldiers wept openly, veterans recalled his generosity, and the Senate prepared to honor him as Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. News traveled swiftly, carried on the same roads and sea lanes he had labored to improve. For a moment the vast empire paused, united in grief for the man who had stood at its helm for 2 decades. Hadrian, informed of his mentor's passing, acted swiftly to secure his position. He ordered Trajan's body returned to Rome, where it would receive a burial unlike any before. The emperor's ashes were placed in a golden urn and interred within the base of Trajan's column, the towering monument that depicted his victories in the Dacian Wars. It was a rare honor. Never before had a Roman emperor been laid to rest within the city walls. The choice ensured that his memory would be bound to the heart of Rome, visible to every citizen who walked its streets. In the Senate, debates gave way to unanimous praise. Trajan's reign was remembered not only for its conquests, but for its fairness in governance. He had respected the Senate's dignity, expanded Rome's public works, and upheld laws that strengthened the empire's core. His building projects, forums, markets, aqueducts, stood as tangible proof of his vision. Even his critics admitted that he had balanced ambition with pragmatism, rarely letting glory outweigh practicality. By the time the funeral rites ended, the title Optimus was fixed to his name, setting a standard against which all future emperors would be judged. The provinces he conquered did not remain forever under Roman control. Hadrian would later withdraw from some eastern territories. Yet the roads, forts, and cities founded during Trajan's reign continued to bear his stamp for centuries. In the popular imagination, he remained the model of what a Roman ruler could be: decisive in war, generous in peace, and unafraid to act boldly. Long after the empire's borders receded, poets and historians would speak of the age of Trajan as a golden chapter, when Rome seemed unstoppable and its ruler embodied the virtues it most cherished. Centuries later, medieval popes would greet new emperors with the blessing, "May you be as fortunate as Augustus, and better than Trajan. His name became a shorthand for just rule, his column a stone chronicle of triumph. Though time eroded empires and monuments alike, the story of Trajan endured, of a soldier who rose to command the greatest power of the ancient world, who pushed its boundaries to their zenith, and who died with his people's love. In the annals of history, he remains a ruler both feared and admired, a legacy carved in the marble of Rome.